Okay, fine.
I now welcome representatives joining via video conference from AGRIMUSTER, Outback Helicopters AIRWORKS Northern Territory, AHIA Helicopters, and the Australian Helicopter Industry Association. How terrific that you could get organised to be there all together. Thank you very much for that. For the Hansard record, could you please each give your name, the capacity in which you appear today?
John?
Yeah. Well, good morning and hi, how are you going? It's great to see you again, Senator McCarthy, after a long time. I've got a bit of a hearing problem, and I've noticed your income volume is a little bit low. I don't know if you can do anything about that, but
Just give me our names. Answer. Need our names.
So,
I'll
We just need you each to say your name.
introduce myself. I'm John Armstrong Jr. I'm from operate AGRIMUSTER and Catherine Helicopters in Catherine. And Paul?
Yeah, Paul Bloor, Manager Director and also Chief Pilot of Outback Helicopter AIRWORK MT.
Thank you.
and so I'll go again, yeah, John Armstrong Senior, and I've been part of the furniture for a long time. At the moment, I'm just a private operator.
Terrific.
And,
Thank you.
Warren Kerr here, Managing Director of RFUR Helicopters, trading in Alice Springs Helicopters.
And Senator Paul Tyrrell, CEO, Australian Helicopter Industry Association.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Does anybody want to make a brief opening statement before we start asking questions?
Oh, which is no,
You want to make an opening statement?
yeah, Roger, thank you very much, Senator. Look, I think what probably described in my, particularly the Rotary address that I did in Brisbane a couple of months ago, most of the problems that we have, and also in these statements that I put down to you yesterday, most of the problems we also have, but there's certainly some very much outstanding issues that are of great input. Firstly, and most importantly, is the fuel that we're using, which is causing cylinder failure and the potential for catastrophic failure whilst airborne in whatever horrendous situation we might be operating at the time. As you can imagine, operating in fly trees with recalcitrant cattle, if the engine stops, you don't have much option other than trying to stop yourself getting killed, which could be very hard. We haven't as yet had a fatal accident. We've had some very minor injuries. Should we have a fatal accident in this trade, almost certainly there would be a class action, biggest mother of class actions you've probably almost ever seen. But I dwell upon the fact that we had planned up over 2,000 cylinders in the last 14, 16 months because of this fuel. And also the customs seem to be putting out a plethora of airworthiness bulletins, particularly the latest one, the airworthiness bulletin 85-25, which seems to us just to be a smokescreen and not a recognition of the problem. Can I just put you to the most simple, highest common denominator, which is highlighted in Warren Kerr's notes? The fact is, when the fuel changes, when the fuel changes back to good fuel, we don't have any problems. Now that we're on this, a lot of people are still on this 100 low lead fuel, they're having cylinder problems. It is as simple as that. If that can't be recognised within CASA, well, there's time the chairs are emptied and new people brought in to actually come out to industry and help us through this problem. It's not a matter of the specifications not conforming with the international requirements for our gas. It is a matter of the composition of the fuel and the aromatic. So these aircraft engines were designed back in the 1940s with leaded fuel, and that's the way they must be operated until we change. There's no doubt that the light aircraft like Rotax engines, for example, don't fail on this low lead fuel, but they're designed differently, as are motorbike engines, motorcar engines and the rest. Ours aren't. We're still with the old technology, which must be respected. The new one, Part 138, is a problem for us, but these guys will speak more fully about that for sure. And we believe there's been a total lack of consultation from our point of view, and what consultation has been had has been disregarded, and it's just been way too drawn out and not managed in the manner that we would expect from a professional outfit such as CAS is supposed to be. The AIRWORK, I'll leave it to these guys altogether. The regulation structure is just a nightmare for us and for everyone, and it is just too hard to get across. For example, the Part 61, which is 1,200 pages long, more than 1,200 pages long, is longer than Australia's longest journal novel, which is from the country, which is 1,260 pages. I mean, it is just unnecessary to have such a complicated list of pages. People can't possibly get across it. And to have auditors, when audits are done, checking up on pilots' flight and duty time to see if the time they're taking to get abreast of those regulations is accounted for in the flight and duty is just horrendously stupid. You never ever had to do that. You must present as a professional pilot and or engineer the full bottle on all these regulations without having to pay, without an operation having to pay for wages to do it. The non-compliant operators in the background that are operating against these guys are a major issue still, and always have been, and probably always will be more so in the future. I talked about briefly the what they call franchise operations. There cannot be a franchise operation under CAS regulations for an AOC, but there certainly is cross-hire arrangements which can and must go on, right up to your big jetliners that might have to cross-hire an engine to go into one of their aircraft. Now, the maintenance of that engine has to be clearly seen and documented as who's going to do it, who's responsible for it, and when, and that it will be conducted appropriately. So that's why cross-hire agreements have to be in place, from engines to aircraft to helicopters to whatever you like. That's a given, and it is not a franchise operation. What the problem is here is that we have people who say they're operating under Joe Bloggs' AOC up the road, and he's not operating in accordance with anything that's written in Joe Bloggs' operations manual, and it's not being audited as such by CASA. CASA have to be able to audit those documents, those interchanging documents, and the pilots' magazine, pilots' flight duty schedules, rosters, and also all the aircraft maintenance. That's absolutely crucially important, but we're not seeing any CASA out here on the flat doing that. Meanwhile, these blokes operate that are operating without compliance, are doing so in a much cheaper regime than these guys do, who are compliant and have all their paperwork up to date, and therefore they're competing in a marketplace which is totally not level, quite apart from the fact that if they have a bad crane, particularly under the new industrial manslaughter legislation, for example, if they have a bad crane, then all hell will break loose, but they don't worry about it until something like that might happen. But they have to be compliant. The same as the chain of responsibility legislation, which is only relatively new in our environment, and that came to the fore with trucks turning over with loaded cattle, for example. Who was responsible for making sure the driver of the truck was sober and not under the influence of drugs when he loaded them? Well, the same goes for helicopters for a variety of different reasons, that they must be compliant and not putting their clients at risk. And these guys are compliant, and the other blokes aren't, and they're operating cheap and just running these blokes into the gun. And I would think that it is most important that CASA's compliance auditing is up to the mark so that they can do those sorts of things. It seems to me that the compliance auditing just doesn't happen because maybe CASA doesn't have enough money, or they're not appropriating the money they do have in a way that reflects their core activities, which is supposed to be compliance. We've got an instance up here years ago where a chief engineer was called out to one of his helicopters and it had a driveline failure. The two bolts had fallen out of the driveline shaft. When he got there, they were sitting on top of the top firewall. Now, why those bolts failed, we don't know. We have an idea, but we don't know. It wasn't officially investigated. The engineer put in a defect report immediately to the CASA head office up in Darwin, and that was about 7 years ago. To this day, those bolts are still sitting in an engineer's toolbox, and it has not been acted upon. And this happens time without number with the defect reports being put in and not being acted upon. So clearly, the auditing has to be able to show that the defects are being accepted, looked at in the manner that they should be, so that we can lift our safety standard up consequently. Flight training standards is something that I touched on very strongly in my Rotary report address in Brisbane, and it appears that there's no doubt that people are just crashing for the same reason that they have for years and years and years, and things are not being lifted. We've had reports, I've had reports, two at least in the last several months, where student pilots have come to the industry, frankly, graduated with a commercial licence, and are completely unable to operate the maintenance release of the aircraft, know how to read it and know how to fill it in, those basic things, and also they can't fly. So there's a major problem there. Not much, this day and age, we've got 105 hours, like an extra 40 hours to teach people how to fly, but they just don't seem to be coming out with the standard that they should be. And there's just absolutely no excuse for that. Now, what is happening is, as a result of those crashes, that the hull insurance rates are climbing steeply, and we can't avoid that. CASA can't avoid that. Those rates are proving that the standards are not good enough. That's why people are crashing. A few years ago in Alice Springs at the AIRWORK, there was another pitch accident where a bloke landed loaded with passengers, took off and just pulled the collective up and didn't have enough power, wasn't able to monitor that very simple fact, and crashed the aircraft. Luckily, no one got hurt. But that sort of accident typifies the lack of standards of training. There's another article that I just wish to put to you, and whether you can do anything about it or not, I realise it's outside the terms of reference for today's inquiry, and that's the work compensation changes in the Northern Territory, which has only just occurred in the last 2 months, the latest land renewals, where operators are being quoted from 25 up to 50% for their pilots' work compensation, getting to the stage where even the clerical staff have been included in those quotes. And the clerical staff as well, right around Australia, only 2 to 3% of the bearing costs. So we don't know what it is, but in the insurance trade, those rates are set as per what they call a category risk. They've told us that the category risk is high. We don't know why. We can't recall here locally any recent instances of high payouts. In the last 2 or 3 years that would force it up. And we're just wondering, if whether you might be able to make representation to the underwriters representative body, whoever that may be, with questions along the lines of the price of justification legislation, to ask them to justify that. It's a big impost for these blokes. At this point in time, they're looking at $20 to $25 per hour extra just to pay for the increase in work compensation.
So did you say another $25?
And John.
And
Senator Stalky.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I just wanted to confirm that you said that it was another $25 per hour operating cost in order to cover the workers' compensation charge in the Northern Territory. That is a significant amount of money, and must make it very difficult for the business to continue supplying a service, or for people to want to take that service on.
What's the real question?
Can I follow up on that, Senator? John's got hearing problems, so I can follow that up on in my business. My rate at the moment is 26.5%. my workers' comp. So if I'm paying, for example, a pilot $100, I've got to find another $26.50 on top of that, plus a super, which is standard, I guess. But for instance, I got quotes not long ago. One was 33%, one was 50%, one was 100, and another one declined to put a quote in. So I'm not sure why we're getting hit up here in the Northern Territory on just extremely high workers' comp stuff. I really don't know, but we've asked government up in the Northern Territory and they don't seem to have an answer as well.
Yeah, that's a shocking statistic as an employer. That makes it very expensive for you to be on charging that to your customers. And, you know, helicopter hires are critical for your, for all the northern industries, whether it be agriculture or tourism or emergency services. That's certainly something that I'd be keen to follow up on and understand. As you've rightly pointed out, you know, we're a federal government, but certainly making a recommendation to the territory's government about just understanding why it's so high in the territory. Can I just stay with you for a second, Mr. Bloor, is that right?
That's correct, Senator.
Thank you. So a number of you have made comment about the poor fuel, and I had this raised with me in Queensland as well about the impact that it had on cylinders and valves and the increased cost of maintenance and the safety issues. Do you have a recommendation around that, or is that something you're flagging to industry? What can we take away from that?
Our recommendation is we go to the old leaded fuel, go back to the old original 100-130 fuel. And, you know, since 2017, I've done 49 cylinders. You know, I just purchased a brand new aircraft not long ago, over $600,000 worth. And in the first 170 hours of that aircraft, I've done 3 cylinders that I had to replace within the first, under 200 hours. You know, that's less than probably 5% of that life of that aircraft engine. And this is a common problem that we've been having with all our engines. We just don't seem to get the life out of the cylinders with the low lead. You know, the people that have changed over to the leaded fuel, it's cured the problem. But in my circumstance, it's really difficult because if you fly out to a cattle property or a station or an Aboriginal community or doing ranger group, you know, they'll take the cheaper option of getting cheaper fuel to keep their costs down. So I'm stuck with the low lead fuel, which I'm still incurring problems with. So in short, the recommendation was, our industry would agree to that. We go back to the leaded fuel.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. And I notice Warwick Kerr, Arafura Helicopters. Do you want to make an additional comment to that? I notice in your submission you've talked about fuel and maintenance as well.
Yeah, I think what Paul says is absolutely true. I've been very fortunate. As soon as we received our first shipment of 130, we were able to get all of our clients onto the same fuel. So I guess for a while there, I was the only person to be able to do that. And the results were immediate. We haven't had a cylinder failure since those first drums came into our possession. I guess the underlying issue for me with the fuel was it was such a dramatic chemistry change in the makeup of the fuel. And where I've mentioned it, to be referred to as a component. If someone presented a replacement component like this, there'd be all sorts of regulatory issues going on. This was introduced with no consultation, no testing that I was aware of, and certainly no follow-up. Particularly once these problems became apparent. as Paul said, our recommendation is that 100 LL should be just removed from the marketplace. It's not fit for use.
So have you had any acknowledgement from CASA that the 100 LL is not fit for use? Are they recommending against using it or against its supply?
My company hasn't had any discussions with CASA. Nobody's actually rung or inquired about the operating with this fuel. We, as with the AHIA, we dealt with that through them. With this study that was published that I believe you have a copy of. There has been a number of things, what they call airworthiness bulletins, issued by CASA, which has alluded to bad maintenance practices. We're not doing it correctly. We're not warming up our aircraft or cooling them down correctly. All these, there's been a number of publications issued by CASA to address this problem, which it's so far off the mark, it's ludicrous.
Okay, that's a real concern because this is a broad industry-wide issue, and that's really concerning that they're still not. I'm just reading the airworthiness bulletin that you're talking about, 85-025 issue 3, where there seemed to be some acknowledgement, but yeah, okay, we'll take that on board and follow up that with CASA. Can I turn now to the regulations around flight reviews and checks, and we've got a recommendation from Outback Helicopter AIRWORKS about providing an exemption to the regs to allow a chief pilot from a third-party operator to be able to conduct aerial application and airwork operations proficiency check and training and replacement of a flight examiner who can then check and train in-house personnel. This would alleviate the need to engage examiners from interstate and reduce the cost burdens on the business. My understanding is that would be a reversion to previous practice, which my understanding was working well, that you were ending up with a situation where chief pilots were of an organisation were overseeing, for example, mustering pilots where they might have been having, weeks in a cockpit with a new pilot, checking them and training them, whereas now we've got a more expensive, a more onerous and a shorter process that's not as effective. So, Mr. Bloor, would you talk to that recommendation, please?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Just from my experience, as chief pilot, when a new pilot comes on board, I do minimum probably 200 to 250 hours dual time with him, sitting beside him, doing dual work. I've got had a couple of Indigenous pilots that come through, and they do struggle with their reading and writing and stuff at times, but they're really competent, safe pilots. But, the regulation of Part 61 makes it really difficult to get that through. But the proficiency checks are a nightmare. Constantly got to get people up from other states to do my checks, which is yearly. For instance, for an example, I just got someone up only a few weeks ago. So extra costs for airfares, accommodation, vehicle costs and stuff for him to come up. Cost me $5,500 just for the day for him to come up and check a couple of us out for the aerial application side of things, where I've got friends down in New South Wales and Queensland that can drive 20 minutes down the road. It costs them $400. So my change is that, back to the old standard where the chief pilot should be able to, conduct these checks regularly, which we do all the time anyway, because it's us who's at risk as chief pilots and owners and operators with the new industrial manslaughter rules up here. So we're constantly checking and training ourselves, but CASA still wants to micromanage us, you know, for every little detail and part that we do. And I think our recommendation that we, similar to the Phil Hurst, when he spoke earlier today, part 137, you know, with aeroplanes, another chief pilot can examine another chief pilot from another part 137. So, you know, that's an option that we would, you know, adapt.
So I raised this with CASA, I've raised it with the previous CEO and others, that there doesn't seem to be an understanding of how big Australia is, and that not everybody's operating around Sydney or Melbourne, that particularly when you're talking about the territory, remote parts of Queensland and WA, no doubt South Australia's got the same challenges, that to get people to come and do the sort of endorsements and flight checks that you're talking about is difficult and is expensive, and there are equally good workarounds that have worked for years. So we'll certainly take that on board and raise with CASA, you know, can they demonstrate a reason why that they think that this is not only going to be safer to have this new regulation, but do they understand the cost? I mean, that was the reason that we got that bit of legislation changed a couple of years ago, that CASA had to consider the cost as well as safety impacts. And so I wonder if they are actually taking into account that legislative change that went through, I think it was about July or August of 2019.
If I may, Senator.
I'm sorry, please go ahead. Thank you.
I think one of the things that quite often gets overlooked with this whole check and training process as well is that often, you know, whilst the people we do bring up to do these renewals and stuff are all very highly qualified people, most aren't as current or in touch with the operations being checked out as the chief pilot is. So, you know, it's not just about compliance, it's about the quality of that flight review.
Right. And what you're saying, that, yeah, the reality of the process is that you're getting a lesser outcome than the previous. That's right.
It's quite often looked upon as a box ticking episode, rather than without any real positive training outcomes.
Yeah. Can you speak to the mustering operations certificate as well while you're online?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
So again, this is Mr. Blaw's paper submission. He was talking about the mustering operations certificate. It's a 62-page document. And then
I'll be honest with you, Senator, I stopped reading MPRMs years ago, so Paul's much more up on it than me.
Well, I mean, isn't that a case in point, a document that should be useful to industry and one that you know, technically is supposed to be complying with, but it's so unusable that you know, let's ask Mr. Blaw. What do you reckon about it?
Senator, it's a very complex and lengthy episode to get a mustering endorsement these days. I think John Armstrong, probably nearly 30 years ago, sitting here, done mine, and it goes, you know, a background of history of, you know, your knowledge of cattle, you know, whether you've been off the land, so you understand stuff. It all relies on the person who's training, which was John at the time, how, you know, competent a person was to do your mustering endorsement. And I think it took only a couple of days with John to do my endorsement. These days it's about nearly a month, and multiple pages of paperwork. I can't remember how many pages, but there's quite a few pages, and the risk assessments that you got to be before you go flying, you know, and also afterwards that a pilot's got to do these days, just do their mustering. There's more paperwork than actually flying these days, and it's getting these young pilots up through the ranks again. It's just frightening them off becoming mustering pilots and being compliant. So we've got to simplify it and bring it back to a very small standard where we can bring industry experts with years of experience to take these young kids to their mustering endorsements, through their mustering endorsements, so they can go out and start making money and enjoying flying again. But the fun's gone out of the flying because it's all paperwork.
If I could speak to that as well, Senator, if you don't mind. I recently gained my mustering training approval. I don't do mustering anymore. Just to touch on what we spoke about earlier with the workers' comp, I actually dropped workers' comp out of my business this year. Sorry, not workers' comp. I dropped mustering out of my business because of workers' comp. And by doing that, I saved over $55,000 for insurance in workers' comp. I still have, interestingly enough, I didn't drop mustering off my aircraft insurance because I do agricultural work as well. It's still the same price for Australia-wide insurance to do mustering as it is to do agricultural work. It's just deemed it's up there in price on the insurance. But in the workers' comp in the Northern Territory, and they wanted not just 30% of my wages. I have a wife as well who does our books, doesn't step in a helicopter in a commercial operation at all ever. They wanted 30% of her wages and 30% of our other pilot who was primarily tourism based at the time. And he doesn't do any mustering, but I attained my mustering training approval as a means to train my other pilots. Even though I don't want them to become mustering pilots, they don't have the background and knowledge to do that, I needed a way where I could legally train them. And taking them mustering, where I can control the cabin and they get to learn how to fly, is a very, very good and effective way to teach people how to fly. Otherwise, all they do is fly up and down the gorge or around a rock, and they never actually learn the fine skills that most mustering pilots get. And it's gotten very difficult to do it legally. And I've done it for friends who were private pilots in years gone by and just sat in with them for days on end. This was quite a long time ago, and they weren't. There was no other way for them to do that. And even with now that I have the ability to do the mustering training, I can only do it for people in my company, so I couldn't do it for private pilots, because there's lots of private pilots on stations who get that licence and go and fly. And they're doing it quite dangerous because there's no way we can go and teach them how to do it. A part of that too, I suppose, is something I put in my submission, which was a bit late. I apologise. That I've been flying since 2003, and since that time we've seen more and more convoluted regulations I don't understand. And not in no time since 2003 have I been saved by these regulations. What saved me in my flying career is the training I've received in my early days and ongoing, talking with my peers, and also some of the stuff I've done with Phil Hurst, which are very good as a part of the full race, like the WISE training course he does. That's helped me a lot, but not once have I been saved by the over-complex regulations, which I just don't understand.
No, so you're saying that the paperwork and complex regulations is preventing people joining the industry, staying in the industry, and doing what is terrifically important work in the Northern Territory, as well as Queensland and Western Australia. And other parts of the country as well. So that's a pretty shocking indictment on us as a nation, that we are so process driven that we'd actually stop doing important work rather than simplify it, seems to me.
Exactly. And the same as what Paul was saying earlier with the over complexities in the ag world. I'm a chief pilot of my organisation. Obviously, I can see Paul, he's a chief pilot of his organisation. If we were under the Part 137, as Phil has suggested, I could check him out and he could check me out, or we can go through with the other chief pilots that are up here, but I can't afford to go to Queensland and get stuck for 2 weeks in quarantine if we get a COVID case, and neither can Miles from Queensland come up here and get stuck here for 2 weeks, or the fellow from Tasmania, Bruce, he just can't afford it in our businesses.
But this is not just COVID related, is it? I mean, this is, I think you're talking about a $6,000 or $7,000 cost to bring somebody across from the East Coast when it would be $400 if you were somewhere local to where they're based.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's just another tax on being regionally based.
Yeah, Senator, I just recently done mine. It cost me $5,500, but the rug sold on the road. A week later, they give exemptions. So for a stroke of a pen, to be compliant, I had to do mine within a certain time date. Once I've gone past that, I can't do my job. You know, and once COVID comes through, they give extensions for your medicals, your, other different things. You know, they gave extensions of a stroke of a pen and nothing really happened in between that. There was no accidents, no incidents, so I can't see why they can't extend it out anyway. It's just an added cost and a burden on the businesses.
All right, I better hand over to Senator McCarthy to give her some time. Thanks, Senator McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. And clearly your submissions really do outline some major concerns and some really serious ones. I just wondered if either of the Armstrong family would like to just tell us some more direct examples of what's actually going on in the Northern Territory in terms of just the day-to-day running. You spoke briefly then, but I think it's really important for those listeners who are tuned in around the country, just about the kind of lives that we have in the Territory here and how important it is, obviously, to have the right fuel for starters, but just the whole mustering and the impact on the cattle industry if you're not able to get up there and do what you have to do.
Oh, no, I didn't get it.
You talk. Yeah, so for day-to-day in the Territory, there's a lot of helicopters up here, and I'll touch on some of the new rules coming out with CAS because of it. With the way they want to put us into the 138 and separate what we can and can't do under 138, one of the things we won't be able to do will be medical retrieval work. That's going to go under a different section, and that'll stop people like Paul and myself from being able to pick people up who are hurt out in the bush and take them back to a hospital. Now, we do have a care flight organisation up here, but they can't do everything. And there's choppers right across the Territory. So back to what we do in the Territory, there's, I'm based in Katherine and Paul's a little bit further north, and there's lots of other operators up here, and there's lots of mustering goes on every day with private operators as well. So it's a pretty interesting place to live with lots of interesting things to do. But
John, can I just jump in there and just ask again if you can explain that medical retrievals? How often would you be doing that anyway prior to having to move to this next? Can you just explain?
Actually, not a lot, but I myself personally, not a lot. We do have the capability for it, but I do live right across from the Katherine Hospital, and I see quite a lot of different aircraft come in there. Once every month or so, you see a different aircraft, which is not care flight, it'll be a 22 or a 44 come in, and I hear of some of the stories of people with broken legs or dehydrated hikers to a fellow who've been gored by a buffalo, been brought in there. So you do hear about it. It does happen quite regularly, and it's an ability that's been taken away from us.
Do you want to explain how that's been taken away from you?
Just by the writing of the new rules, in that they're going to lump all the aerial work in Part 138 and then Part 137 as well. And I can find where it is. I think it's separately into Part 119. I'm not sure on that rule. I have to get back to that one. Which one exactly?
That's okay. We've got it, but I just think just in the interest of those listening so they understand what the changes are.
Yeah, so the changes are, at the moment, I operate under an AOC, and I own the AOC, and we can do work that we've been certified to do. And now, and a lot of that, it'll just be simple things like search and rescue, mustering, surveying, and charter work, et cetera, et cetera. And in the new rules, we're going to be given certificates, as I understand it. I really struggle to understand it, if I'm being perfectly honest. It's not clear. So I'll have to have a certificate for charter, which will also then cover the EMS, as far as I understand. Then I'll have a Part 138 certificate for most of the other airwork I do. I think eventually I'll end up with a Part 137 certificate for the agricultural work. I may end up with another certificate for the to be able to conduct the mustering training as well. I'm not actually sure I'm going to be able to be chief pilot of all of these certificates. The best answer I've had when I've asked people about that is, oh, well, they'll have to. They'll have to let you be a chief pilot, because currently you can't be a chief pilot of 2 AOCs. So going forward with having to operate under multiple certificates, not convinced that's going to be an ability we have. And so basically it's not clear and it's not concise. And those are 2 words I've picked from the beginning of the Civil Aviation Act under CASA's functions. And Section 8, Part 9, CASA's function, paragraph C, developing appropriate, clear and concise aviation standards. So, it's an absolute failure on that regard.
Thanks, John. I might just, I'm conscious of time for you all. I might just go back to Paul. Law. Can you hear me? I'm not sure who's on. Someone's put us on hold. Have we got Paul Bloor on the line, or is?
Yeah, still here.
Yeah, there you are. Sorry, I didn't know if you could hear me with the music going. Just when you were speaking earlier about the you want to simplify it so you can take young kids to get their mustering endorsement. I'm just wondering, have you got any numbers on just how many do it now?
Senator, I haven't at the moment. I can take that
take
answer
it on notice. Yeah,
notice
take it
and
on
get
notice.
back to you.
Absolutely, and I think it was you that mentioned with some of the Indigenous chopper pilots. I certainly know one. I don't know too many. One from Boral away, but you raised there some of the issues as well, and I just wondered if you wanted to expand on that, even take that as a question on notice that we should be aware of as we approach CASA for questioning.
I've employed a few Indigenous pilots. I train them as well. Mate, they're great for mustering because they've just got that natural ability and skill that they're really great for young other enthusiastic Indigenous kids when they do go out there and do their work. It's quite entertaining and surprising when they do see someone Indigenous jump out of a helicopter and they think, where the hell do you come from? But we've got to simplify CASA, or the regulations or the rules have got to be a bit more simplified for these young kids coming through the line. It's at the moment, as someone mentioned earlier this morning, you need a lawyer beside you to interpret all the rules and regulations. We've got to put it in a way that, like the old system before Part 61 come through, was really simple, simplistic, but since that comes through, it's just become a nightmare. So I can get back to you on more information on that, but it's just got to be more simplified.
Okay, and I think I might just go to John Armstrong Senior. Is there anything you'd like to finish on with regards to your evidence here today, especially about your experience with the fuel concerns?
Yeah. Anything that you'd like to finish on
just fuel? I'll just reiterate the checking training, the mentoring. The mentoring is so important. And under the old Reg 206, what we used to do is an experienced pilot would get a core of experienced pilots and new pilots coming in. So I would be an approved pilot by CASA to endorse an experienced pilot to show the young fellows the ropes. Under that system, we lifted our crash rate from 1 in 4,000 charge hours to 1 in 12,000 charge hours to 1 in 30,000 charge hours, which was the peak. And that's about the time that the new regulations came in and all the mentoring fell over as not being allowed to be done. It's just too complicated now to be done. But that's the sort of thing that can be done. The hull rates, the hull insurance rates reflected that very low accident rate, and that's what we can do. It can be done. It can be easily done. Just with having Paul, having one of his senior pilots be delegated to fly with a new pilot for a week or so, or a month, whatever he feels is necessary to show him the ropes. But being able to do that legally without having to jump through many, many hoops of paperwork that aren't even in place at this point in time. We've tried to stress that to the Part 138 structure renewals, but it just seems to be washing right across, and it's still not legal, really.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And can I thank all of you who've given the time to make these excellent submissions and to give your time today. I'm sorry that we perhaps didn't get time to talk at length on these incredibly important issues. And if there's anything that you feel that we've missed or you would have liked to have had a chance to speak about, please come back to the Secretariat, let us know. We can either have some more time, or if there's anything else that you'd like to submit in writing. But we are very grateful, as the senators who are on today, as I am very grateful for your time, because, you know, this is terrifically important to our future in regional Australia. So thank you very much. Please go with our thanks. That concludes today's hearings. Thank you to all witnesses who appeared. Thank you also to Hansard and Broadcasting. Anybody who has taken on notice questions, please get them back to us by the close of business by the 21st of September. And that does conclude our hearing for general aviation today, and the committee stands adjourned. Thank you very much.